Royal Road is one of the best places on the internet for web fiction. While lit RPG and progression fantasy might be side favorites, you can find great works of any genre, in theory. In practice, with so much content to choose from and so many specific tastes, it can be difficult to know what's worth checking out. The cover and title can only do so much to grab your attention, and it's easy for works to get lost in the masses. Which is why I'm here to give stories a little extra spotlight and help you decide if they're worth your time. Welcome to episode 1 of the Royal Road Report. My goal here is not to tell you whether I personally think a story is good or not. I'm not making reviews. Instead, I'll give you a sort of expanded synopsis, a little extra information from a reader's perspective. If it's a cultivation novel, I'll be playing it straight or steering clear of arrogant young masters. Does the lit RPG go full on skills for every action and level up notifications, or just a few stat points? When you say kingdom building, do you mean politics and economics, or hunting monsters and bandits while someone else does the management? I'll also tell you a bit about what the main character is like and the level of prose and spelling. For this last point, it's not a score since this isn't a review, but some people care more and some less for the quality of their free content. I don't want to go into full spoiler territory, so I will keep my first impressions to the first few chapters. To start us off, I've picked a selection of stories from Popular This Week and Rising Stars over the last 7 days. First from Rising Stars, we have This Junior Sister is a Bit Introverted by Flying Pirate Cat. The story is about Rin, a cultivator on her third go at life. Her first life, long ago enough to be forgotten. Her second life, spent as a demonic cultivator. Now, with much regret over her past, she's been brought back in time for another go. Rin has a calm and detached personality, as you might have guessed from the title. It's too early to guess where her life will go, but the story so far is fairly standard cultivator regression. Rin has no cultivation talents, but with the extensive knowledge from her past life is able to overcome those difficulties. Rather than returning to the demonic path or taking revenge on her former enemies, she's now striving for a more peaceful life with modest levels of power. The tone of the story so far is rather melancholy, with dark elements typical to a cultivation novel, and Rin lingering on her past. Though there is some humour from seeing other characters' perspectives of Rin. All signs point to her being the type of protagonist who struggles to be subtle despite her best efforts. Overall, it's looking like the start of a decent cultivation novel with a fairly unique MC, being a demonic cultivator and yet not evil. The prose isn't polished, but has no issues with spelling or grammar. I recommend this to fans of regular cultivation novels who want to see some demonic techniques used for good. Reborn as a Demonic Cat by Iron Lung centers on Ethan Hawke, an overworked salaryman so deep in the pit of overwork that he doesn't even realize he's despairing at life until the day it ends. He's reborn as a sentient hat able to possess creatures and steal their skills, and sets out to grow in power, lead his allies, and build a kingdom. Ethan has a straightforward personality and faces situations head-on. He's accompanied by a snarky and sarcastic system helper. The system has a full suite of features: HP, levels, stats, skill points, and notifications for things like kills and status effects. A worthwhile read for fans of unusual non-human main characters, though be aware it follows the trope of anything not human being considered monsters by humans, including people with animal ears, so don't expect all weird creatures all the time. The prose is solid with no spelling issues. I recommend this to fans of Monster MC lit RPG who like plenty of fighting and a crunchy system. Next up, we have Revolver Chronicles by Larkspur Wren. Sarek Eden is a rebellious prison inmate in hell with missing memories who is about to be executed. She escapes her fate and obtains a divine gun inhabited by a spirit who wants her to climb out of hell and kill along the way. Sarek feels a little flighty with a personality that doesn't take anything too seriously. She flips a little between her defiant nature and meekness from her circumstances, but overall seems like a fun MC for those who like characters that get themselves into and out of trouble. The story is pretty gory but nothing egregious. It earns its graphic violence tag, but it's not horror. The writing is very good, with nice prose and no spelling issues. There's not a lot of characters in the first couple of chapters, but the ones we do see have a decent character voice. I recommend this to fans of lit RPG who want some well-written, gratuitous gun-based violence that feels a little more casual than full-on military fiction. Salt and Blood, a pirate lit RPG by Adventuress. Rose Everblue is a young girl living in a small village. With her 15th birthday approaching, she's expected to pick one of her parents' trades to take up. Instead, she steals a fishing boat and sets out to become an infamous pirate. Salt and Blood looks at pirates the way works like One Piece or Pirates of the Caribbean do, as charismatic adventurers looking for freedom and treasure on the high seas. Rose herself is young, and even the synopsis describes her as a little clueless, but she has a hunger for adventure and a willingness to get out there and seize what she wants. The first few chapters start with a little setup, so not a story for those who like to jump into action and stats immediately, though there is a promise of combat later on. The system is advertised as light and accordingly hasn't shown any stats, though it is a type with a skill for every activity. The prose is a little rough with how hard it goes on the descriptions, though it smooths out pretty quickly. No issues with spelling or grammar. I recommend this to people that like their pirates more Treasure Planet than Black Sails. And now moving on to the slightly more established works on the popular This Week list, who I think still deserve a little shout out here and there. Cultivation Nerd by Holy Mouse. Liu Feng has reincarnated into a cultivation world, and like many who do, has taken the place of a young cultivator that has just died in a duel. After getting his bearings and coming to terms with his new situation, he immediately decides that he wants as little as possible to do with cultivator nonsense, and is instead interested in learning more about how the world works and quietly practicing his cultivation to respectable levels. And also, like many, he is entirely incapable of keeping a low profile or staying out of trouble. As a main character, his personality is pretty fun, and he manages to be snarky without getting annoying. While circumstances often force his hand, he does make some reasonable efforts to stay out of trouble, and get the things he wants, while still acknowledging reality and getting involved with the people around him. The story is well written with pretty good prose and quite strong character voices. I recommend this to fans of cultivation who want an MC that isn't big on cultivator arrogance and murder, but knows when to draw the line and draw his sword. Stray Cat Strut by Ravenstagger is about Catherine LeBlanc, an orphan living in a cyberpunk dystopia. As if that wasn't bad enough, the world is under constant threat by alien invaders. Fortunately for Cat, she's been chosen as one of humanity's guardians to fight off the incursions. Despite a seemingly bleak setup, Stray Cat Strut is a pretty funny series with plenty of humour to balance out bursts of grim violence. Cat gets access to powers that are not quite lit RPG, where she gets points for killing things that she can spend on equipment like weapons and cyberware. Cat herself is a character with a rough exterior from her difficult life, but a kind heart and a drive to help people. Like everyone who gets chosen, she wants to protect humanity, though she's perfectly willing to pull a gun on her fellow man if that man makes himself a problem for her. The prose is as good as you would expect from an author as well known as Ravenstagger, with plenty of good humour and interesting characters. I recommend this to people who feel magical girls aren't violent enough, but who don't want the doom and gloom of a dark magical girl show. Ghost in the City by Saras. Motoko Kusanagi is from modern-day Earth, but for reasons unknown to her, she wakes up in Night City from the universe of Cyberpunk 2077 as a random person in a hospital. She learns that her older brother is a member of a Tiger Claw gang, and that she is recovering from having been kidnapped. She also learns that she now has access to a system which grants her levels, stat points, and skills for certain activities. The story is very character-driven, as Motoko is just a regular person and her newfound power doesn't push her to do anything. While she's certainly stronger than the average person, she's not so powerful she can just run rampant, so most of the plot is her living her life. A life that just so happens to involve a lot of gratuitous violence and cyberpunk-appropriate gunfights. Motoko is a very realistically written character, perhaps owing to the story being a self-insert, though maybe with a wider violent streak than the author actually has. One hopes. The prose is good and the story is well written with excellent fight scenes and enjoyable characters. I recommend this one to Cyberpunk 2077 fans, but knowledge of the setting is not required and it stands up as a lit RPG for anyone who just enjoys cyberpunk settings. And finally, The Bee Dungeon by Icolos. Belisar is a beekeeper muddling his way through life in a small village, until the day his village is destroyed and he almost dies. Before he can though, he is teleported away into the middle of nowhere and given control of a Tower of the Gods, a dungeon that can spawn monsters under his control and pushes back the Hunger, a dangerous miasma that covers the surface of the world. Knowing little else, Belisar chooses bees as his monsters. Don't be misled by the cover art. As far as I know, the novel features only bee-looking bees. A lot of them. Honestly, Belisar almost takes second place to all his bees. Don't expect quite the usual fare of dungeon building, as Belisar is given little guidance and knows only his life as a peasant beekeeper. He makes it through on quiet determination and the love his bees have for him, rather than careful planning or tactical mastery. Also, be prepared for a swarm of bee puns. The prose is fairly simple but of consistent quality with no issues on spelling or grammar. I recommend this one to fans of dungeon crawl novels who want something quite a bit different than the usual trap-filled stone corridors, and readers who enjoy a humble main character gaining a little confidence and finding his pride and value in the world. So there you have your first selection of web serials for episode 1. Of course, given the chance, I'd be remiss not to throw out some personal recommendations where I can. So for this episode, why not check out Curse Gunner by Iced Fairy? This is a shorter and completed novel from a few years ago about a witch called Helena Awede. Her specialty is curses, so to no surprise she gets hired to help someone break one. The setting is an interesting take on the magical realms colliding with the mundane world, as Helena lives in a sort of urban fantasy border realm. It's a good read and has a also completed sequel that I'm currently reading. And finally, in more general web serial news, Wildbow, the well-known author of Worm as well as Pact, Twig and various sequels, has just started his newest web serial. For anyone who's been thinking about getting into Wildbow's works but was daunted by the sheer word counts, now is your chance to hop in at the very start of a brand new story. So have a look at Seek, a new sci-fi web serial.